Welcome back to the workshop and Series 10. And Mike, I'm really looking forward to this one because we are once again dealing with weathering.
Absolutely, yeah. We're moving forward in time. We've gone from the 1960s in the first series we did on weathering in 2023 through to a modern privatisation period. And you'll see from the rolling stock and the workbench in front of us here, we've got a nice varied selection, starting from the very early years of privatisation with the Strathclyde Passenger Transport Class 101, right through to the very latest BR large logo balloon liveried Class 66 operated by GBRf.
Absolutely. Now, in Series 1, for those people who haven't seen it, Mike, we worked with some powders, we worked with some washers, and of course we got the airbrush out as well. But in Series 2, apart from now using more modern stock from the 90s onwards, for example, what techniques we're going to explore this time?
Okay, so we're going to do a lot more of the handworking and add much more detail into the techniques we're actually using with these weathering projects this time, to show you a bit more of what you can do. We're also going to use some different types of products as well. So we've got some different washes and paints which we're going to use as part of the weathering process. And the aim is to be delivering complete trains where at the end of each piece you'll be able to see that actually this is how a whole train of these would look. So it's little things like, for example, you'll be able to see these Castle Cement PCAs on the workbench here today. They would weather similarly in a rake of wagons running on the railway, but actually there's always little variations with it. Weather exactly the same. The streaks won't be in exactly the same position, they won't be exactly the same weight. So lots of getting those subtle nuances, which actually at first glance you probably wouldn't notice some of them, but actually you look again and actually do notice that actually there is a significant difference between each one, but it's still within that same colour palette as well.
Now, I'm just going to call this straight away. In Series 1, you made me weather all of the 21-ton mineral wagons, which I'm quite happy about, but this time you get to do all of these.
Well, the good thing is I've already done them. Beat them to it. So this whole rake is already weathered, apart from a couple which I'm still just finish off the details on.
Yeah. All right, stop showing off.
We show people the real detail of what we put into these wagons. So if you were at the recent Great Electric Train Show at Marshall Arena in Milton Keynes, you may well have spotted this rake of PCAs actually running around Pete Waterman's layout, because one of the reasons we did them was actually we wanted to have a full set of weathered wagons to run around there, showing what a cement train would look like, with some new features on them as well, which we didn't cover in Series 1 of our weathering pieces. And that is adding graffiti as well. So it's not just weathering, it's actually going a little bit further with these as well.
Well, I mean, look, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the graffiti and how you can obviously weather everything down. So I think enough talking. Let's join Mike in his workshop to watch him tackle these.
Look great, don't they? It's Howard Smith here from the Model Centre. I hope you're enjoying this lovely series on weathering models. But if weathering isn't your forte, and let's face it, it isn't everybody's particular cup of tea, all the different implements that you might need and the skill and the practice, well, we can do it for you at the Model Centre. If you take a look at our website, you'll see the full range of models that we stock, and believe me, it is very large. And we'll customise any particular model to your exacting standards, whether that's choosing from our variety of finishes to a custom finish that you can select on checkout. Simply send us a photograph of the exact locomotive and how you would like us to depict it, and our talented workshop staff, well, they'll deliver. If you'd like more details and information, check out themodelcentre.com.
So welcome back to my workshop, where today we're going to start work on this rake of Castle Cement PCA wagons. They're made by Accurascale. I know graffiti is a bit of a contentious topic, but I saw a rake of these come through Leicester Station about 12 months ago, and every single one of the wagons, from the front of the train to the back of the train, had graffiti along the bottom half of the tank sides. So I thought what would be good to do is replicate that. But one of the things I was also thinking is that actually you don't always want that much graffiti on your layout. So rather than doing both sides of every wagon, which is how the actual train was when I saw it, I thought I'd just do it on one side of the wagons, so we can show you how you could actually have a rake where actually, one day you want them looking weathered but without graffiti finish, and then the next day you might want to turn them around and have a graffiti finish on them, that you can actually do that for your wagons as well. So to create the graffiti effects on these wagons, I've gone to the Railtech Transfers website, and I've come away with a collection of their different sheets, all with different types of weathering on them. So I've got some big weathering elements. I've also got some much smaller pieces as well. Lots of different little graphics we can use on the wagons to give each one a little bit of variety. So I could use those across the wagons. Now I've already done a couple of them, and what I started off with was these two here. Which has got a combination of one here which has got literally one single transfer running all the way along the body side, And then I've got a second one where I've used one of the big transfers, but with a couple of connected small transfers as well, which relate to it. Now, simple stuff's needed to do water slide transfers. So for Railtech transfers, you need a tub of water. I've added a little bit of PVA to that as well. It's recommended by the manufacturer where you've got transfers that are going to go over slight undulations on the body. These have got to go over the body side ribs. So I've added a little bit of PVA, just 2 small drops into this container of water. I've got a pair of tweezers to help manage the transfers in and out of the water. I've got a small paintbrush which I'll use to actually just manipulate the transfers into position and finish them off. Pair of sharp scissors to cut them out from the sheet, and a piece of kitchen towel which I'll use to blot away the excess moisture when each transfer is applied to the wagon. So simple things. We're going to start off with one of these nice big transfers, I think, for this wagon. And all I'm going to do is carefully cut around the transfer. To separate it from the main sheet, and then I'm just going to pop it into this container of water. Then I have to wait for a few minutes whilst it soaks to absorb that moisture. Now, one of the things to be careful of with any transfer is that you don't allow it to soak for too long. If you allow it to soak for too long, it can dissolve the adhesive that's part of the transfer printing process, which means then your transfer, whilst it might appear to go onto the model quite nicely, it won't stick and it won't stay. But we're just going to manage this very carefully, make sure it doesn't get too hot, too wet, and then we can transfer it across onto the wagon. Now you want to get the transfer to the point where it will just move on the paper, but only just. We're pretty much at that point now. So I'm going to pull that out of the water, turn my wagon over on its side, and I'm just going to use very light finger pressure just to hold the transfer, and then very carefully pull the transfer paper out from behind it. Right, so our transfer is now laying on the wagon. I'm going to wet the end of the paintbrush as well. I'm going to start using the paintbrush now just to manoeuvre this into position on the wagon body. And it's just a case of using this brush just to manoeuvre the transfer exactly to where we want it on the wagon body, and then start to ease out some of the water from behind it. Now you can see at the moment it's still quite easy to manoeuvre it around on here. Just slip there on the model, which I don't want it to do. But I'm pretty happy with where it's now sitting. So I'm just going to absorb some of the spare moisture up with my paintbrush to make sure that little end of the letter tucks in behind that piece of moulding. And I'm going to use my kitchen towel to carefully blot away the rest of the moisture. Now, what I like to do with a big transfer like this is work on it at one area at a time. So I'm doing the bottom half first, making sure I absorb the moisture without moving the transfer. Then move up to the top half and do the same. Making sure it's all fully pressed in, we've absorbed all that spare moisture from the transfer. So there we go, that's very simple, nice big transfer onto the side of the wagon, and it's given this one an instant graffiti finish to it. Now, I'm just going to add another little graphic onto this as well, so I'm going to pick one of the smaller ones to go on it too. So I'm going to one of my other sheets now. And, I saw a little graphic I liked on one of these. Got a little scorpion here in black, so I'm going to use the scorpion. Again, exactly like I did before, just cutting it out from the sheet. Being careful not to catch any of the transfers whilst they're there. And then this being a smaller transfer, it should take less time than the first big one did in the water. Just going to pop that in the water and soak it until it's ready to release from the transfer paper. So having completed the first batch of transfers for the graffiti wagons, I'm going to leave those to dry and cure fully for about 24 hours before I do anything else with those. In the meantime, not every wagon is going to have graffiti on it, so I'm going to start by applying the basic underframe weathering to a batch of other wagons for the rake. So I've got about 21 wagons to do in total to make this whole train look the part, so it's going to be quite an intensive process. What I'm doing this time is, in the previous series we looked at using Lifecolor paints. This time we're going to use Lifecolor paints again, but I'm going to use their liquid pigments this time, which actually, these require no dilution to be used with an airbrush, which makes them really quick and efficient to use. I get some really nice effects from them as well. So I'm using the railway set for this one, so it's liquid pigments for trains and tracks. It's got smoke, carriage grime, brake dust, frame dirt and rail dust in it. I found the combination of brake dust, frame dirt and rail dust makes a really nice underframe finish. So we're starting off with the frame dirt, which is my basic colour for pretty much every underframe weathering I do. This is just, like I say, it's the liquid pigment version rather than a version you have to dilute yourself to use with an airbrush. So literally just give it a really good shake. Draw a small amount up into this syringe, drop it into the airbrush, and then we are ready to start adding underframe weathering to this wagon. As always, put my pot to one side, keep it nice and safe, and then I'd like to use a old business card as a mask when I'm doing this kind of weathering. So what I'm going to do first, just blow a bit of paint through, make sure everything's working as it should. Then I like to use a business card as a mask to prevent the weathering going everywhere. So we're just going to come in nice and close with this airbrush and start building up some dirt on the underframe. So these are really subtle colours as well in the liquid pigments. And the nice thing with them as well is that, as well as being able to be used literally out of the pot as they are, once they're on the wagon as well, you can actually manipulate the colours to create different effects as well. Now, the only, I wouldn't call it a downside I suppose, but you've got to be careful not to get too much on at once, because otherwise you can end up with pooling of the paint, and that doesn't look particularly good either. Just working my way around all four sides of this wagon. And the business card is just making sure that we just keep some focus on where the paint goes. Probably looks a little bit haphazard at the moment, but this is just, like I say, a base layer of weathering colour to go on this wagon. So targeting all the areas which would get hit with dirt coming up from the rails, basically. And the other thing you can do with the mask is if you pull a bit further away and spray towards the mask, you get a soft edge, whereas if you have it right against the wagon, then you get a hard edge to the paint. And having done that, I'm just going to invert the wagon the other way up and hold it by hand now. Now, one of the things I think is easy to overlook with wagon weathering is to forget to turn the wagon upside down to do the underside. So here I've just turned it upside down. We can get a bit of frame dirt going off on the underside as well. Again, because we've used a business card to mask off the body, it means that actually we haven't got any paint to worry about touching on the body at this point either, which makes it really easy to handle as well. Now you will get a bit of overspray up onto the body doing this as well, but at this point it's not a problem. So that's the first one of this little collection of 5 here done. I'm going to work through the rest of those, then I'll show you how we put the next colour on top.
Weathering can vastly improve all aspects of any model railway, in any scale and gauge, transforming a toy train into a lifelike depiction of the real thing. In this series, we explore the basic and highly effective techniques and demonstrate how to weather goods and passenger rolling stock, steam and diesel locomotives, utilising easy-to-use items such as weathering powders, sprays and washes. Join Mike and Jonathan as they guide you through all the techniques needed to have a go yourself in our brand new 4-part series, 1960s style weathering, exclusive to keymodelworld.com.
Right, so having completed our first frame dirt colour on the wagon, I'm going to move on to use a couple of different colours now from this rail weathering set. So I'm going to use the rail dust. I'm also going to use the brake dust colours as well. These will give us some more additional colouring to the underframe of this wagon. I'm going to start with just a very small amount of the brake dust. This is quite an orangey colour, but again, just tiny amounts of it in the right places, and it just add a little bit of colour and texture to the underframe. Probably only need one tiny amount to do all 5 wagons here. As you can see, it is quite a bright colour. So again, using the business card as a mask, so I can come in nice and close. And I'm not trying to put much on here at all, just small amounts around the wagon, in the right places where you'd expect to see brake dust. So really around the axle box is the main target. Now, a nice thing about this Iwasher Eclipse airbrush that I'm using is you can come in really close with it as well and get right into the brakes without actually touching anything else. Just going to work my way around these wagons, adding this extra colour in, and then we'll move on to the next one. So I'm now going to move on to our third colour of underframe weathering, which is using a colour called Rail Dust from the Tracks and Trains set. Again, I don't need a huge amount of this, just a few drops into the airbrush. That'll do the job for this one. And very much like what we did with the first layer of frame dirt, this is about adding a second layer over most of what we've done already, but not adding too much either, because this could be quite a bright colour on these. However, it will give a little bit of a cement dust type effect as well at the same time, which is something we are looking for these wagons. And once again, I'm inverting the wagon upside down so we can add a bit more underneath. But as this colour, I'm going to concentrate around the outlet pipes on the bottom here. And one of the things I aim for when I'm doing a whole rake of wagons like this is, whilst I'm using similar colours, and whilst the wagons would weather in similar ways, being in a rake, I'm also trying to make sure each one's just slightly different, whether it's a different weight of weathering in an area, or whether it's got more on the underframe, more on the body, whatever it may be, just so they don't end up with a whole uniform rake of wagons that all look the same, because that's be just like having a set of pristine ones. All the colours of these wagons would be similar in terms of their weathering style, just because they're all doing cement traffic, they're all doing the same type of train running through the same kind of atmosphere. Right, so now we've got the basics of the underframe weathering done on these. I'm going to leave all those again to dry fully. I'm going to continue on and do another batch of underframes, so we're going to get about 10 of these all done with underframes weathered up. And then I'm going to move on and start working on the bodies to give them a weathered look as well.
So you're building a model railway. Here at TMC, the Model Centre, we cater for all your modelling needs, whether that's Pico track, Woodland Scenics accessories, even DCC Concepts layout control. And as you'll see behind me, we have a very small selection of one of many different brands we stock, such as Oxford Diecast, Hornby, Bachmann, even Accurascale. Take a look at our website to see the full range of our products. And don't forget, every Friday we upload our new pre-owned listings if you'd like to save a little bit more on your layout build. Perhaps you're stuck with an aspect of railway modelling, or any other aspect of modelling for that fact. Our customer service team is just an email or a phone call away. For everything else, you can visit our website at themodelcentre.com, and if you're passing in the area near Beckhole, Whitby, pop in and see our showroom.
So I've left the wagons to dry and to get the underframe weathering all set, and now I'm ready to move on to the next stage of the process, which is about adding the first layer of weathering over the tank barrels. Now the colour I'm going to use for that is the rail dust colour from the liquid pigments set for traction trains from Lifecolor, and very simply, I've already done one of these wagons already actually, but very simply it's going to load it up in the airbrush like we have done before. Like all these liquid pigments, they are really simple to add. You don't have to stir them or let them down with any thinners or anything. So we just draw a bit of that up into there, drop it into the airbrush colour cup, and then it's ready to apply over the tank body. I've got a nice low pressure setting on for these, so about 15 psi running on the compressor underneath the workbench. I'm just going to start working down from the top of the tank wagon barrel to the bottom, so working down. And you notice me fairly indiscriminate about where it's going. This is just an initial layer which is going over the wagon. And what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to manipulate all that with a cotton bud dipped in airbrush cleaner. Pretty much done on that wagon. Just going to lift that off for a moment and bring the second one back in. I'm just going to add a second pass over this one. Just add a bit more depth to the colouring on it. Right, so I can put the airbrush to one side now. I've got a cotton bud now which has been moistened in airbrush cleaner. And I'm going to start just working my way down the tank barrel now, drawing that colour down and manipulating it. So quite simply, I'm using that just to start moving around the paint that we put onto the tank barrel. It means you don't just end up with a flat airbrush finish over the tank barrel, which is not what we really want here. Now, it's all very subtle at this point, but the colour is there, but you have to look really hard to actually see it. And using the turntable, spin the wagon round, and do the same on the other side as well. This process of taking paint off, putting paint on, it's creates some really nice weathering effects on a wagon. Whereas if you just airbrushed it and put the colour on, it could look very bland. So that's that next process complete. We've got all that basic colour added to the tank barrel now, and we're ready to actually start adding the next layer of colour onto it, which is all about using powders to enhance how this wagon's going to look. So that one's not quite dry enough yet, so I'm just going to move it off the workbench. When we move back to the tank wagon, I'll show you how it's done. So for my powder weathering, I've got a collection of different colours here ready. I've got a DCC Concepts darker limestone colour. I've got a Easy Weathering Products very light grey powder. And I've also got a dry dust colour from a Lifecolor weathering set as well. Now, I found from doing these wagons so far that actually the main ones I really want are the darker limestone and the very light grey. And just a very small amount of this dry dust is actually needed to weather these wagons. It's got quite a yellowy tinge to it in terms of the dust, so too much of that can look a little bit wrong. But we can use a little bit of that just to give a little bit of subtlety and variety and tone in the colouring on the wagons as well. So I'm going to start with a soft brush to add in just very small quantities of this Lifecolor dry dust pigment. I'm just working from the top of the wagon downwards, all the time using this vertical streaking process to mimic how cement dust would fall down the wagon side. And like I said, this particular colour, it is a little bit yellow in its tone, but it's good for adding a bit of texture and detail underneath any final colouring we put onto the wagons as well. Now you'll be able to see even here that actually the colouring that is going onto the wagon, it is very subtle. It's not like we're putting lots and lots of heavy different colours onto these wagons. It's all about adding just gentle, soft colouring to them. Now, I'm happy with the amount of the dry dust on there, so I'm now going to move on to this easy weathering powder now, which is very, very light, again, very subtle in its effect. Be a little bit more liberal with this one. It's just going to add, again, just depth and toning to the different layers of weathering on these wagons. I think this is one of the great parts about weathering now, is this about building up layers and interest and depth to these colours we're putting on the wagon, and actually to really bring it to life as well. You see how we've got some of the powders dropping onto the bottom of the underframe there as well. And brush that in and work it in. I mean, this powder I'm using now is incredibly fine, and actually even to the naked eye is quite difficult to see in terms of its effect on the wagon, but it is having an effect. It's just very soft, very subtle, and the more you build these up, the more obvious the effect becomes. So our third and final colour is the darkest of the three, and I'm really using this just to highlight where cement would have fallen from the filling point on top of the tanks and down the body side. So again, small quantities, specific positioning. We don't want this all over the body side, it's just going to look totally wrong. And really we're trying to create that effect of dried on cement now. It's maybe had rain and other things have applied to the side of the wagon, which just stained and tarnished this colour down the body side. I think one of the other things here as well is it's quite nice that actually by doing this all by hand you can add slightly different effects to even each end of a wagon. So you can see on the left here we've got more of this darker limestone colour, whereas on the right I've got a much smaller amount. Again, we can vary that between each wagon, so each one, whilst it's got the right and similar colours, each one has a slightly different finish to it as well. I'm just working a bit more of the darker colour around the actual tank filling points to finish those off and draw any remnants down the tank barrels there. So having completed that side of the wagon, we'll spin it round, repeat all the same process on the other side, using these same colours all the way through the process to give us a realistic looking cement wagon at the end of the process. Now on this side also we've got a lot of the graffiti as well, so we can actually work over the top of that with the weathering powders. Helps to blend that in and soften it as well. You can see here now where I'm applying the softer, whiter powder over the top of the yellowy dried dust. It's all blending it all together. You know, nothing's too harsh, nothing too stark, but all that detail is there. So, having finished that one, I've got a couple more left to do. Then we'll have a full train, almost ready to go after a couple more steps.
Introducing Key Model World, your new online destination for everything railway and scale modelling. Featuring exclusive videos and features, unseen images, step-by-step guides, railway history and the latest news. Plus, it's home to our full layout build series.
I'm going to stop you right there though, because I didn't do this. This is all you're doing.
Join us for the latest content from Key Publishing's modelling titles, Hornby Magazine and Airfix Model World. Sign up today for as little as £3.75 per month, or if you're a magazine subscriber, bolt Key Model World onto your subscription package now. For more details, visit keymodelworld.com.
So now on the very last finishing touches for these wagons, which is to just add a little bit more detail onto the buffer heads with one of my favourite colours actually, which is the dirty grease effect from Lifecolor. This is UA262, and it does a really good job of representing the grease that you'd find on buffer heads of wagons. Now you only need a very small amount of this at a time, and I'm going to use a really rough brush to do this, because actually it gives a better effect. And you just want a tiny amount on the end of your brush, and just dot it onto the end of the buffer heads, just representing the grease and muck that builds up around the buffers of a wagon. And once this is done, I'm going to give them all a quick spray over with a matte varnish from Humbrol, just to seal all the powders in place, and does actually have the effect of just tying everything together as well. But other than that, this cement train is now ready to be put behind a loco, but I do need to weather the loco as well. I think that's another job for another day.
Well, that was very informative. One of the things I really enjoyed was actually watching you combine different techniques with, the airbrush and the powders and so forth, and sealing it as well. It just goes to show that you can do more than just one thing to get the type of results that you want.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's very much about, particularly with the rakes of wagons, you've got to think that if things are running in a block train, so this is one of the big differences between steam era stock sometimes versus modern era stock, is that things that are running in a block train, they're going to weather at a similar rate.
Yes.
They're not going to be exactly the same on every single wagon through a whole train, but they're going to have a similar colour palette to them because they're running on the same type of traffic. And if they're going to have a similar overall feel to them, but you don't want a uniform monotone grey finish to a cement wagon. There's slightly yellowy greys in this. There's darker greys into it. There's a really white light grey, which you can barely see on the finished wagon, but it adds something to the subtle finish across these as well.
Actually, speaking of that, one of the things that I quite like is the fact that the subtleties have also helped to weather down some of the colour on the graffiti as well. Yeah. It's not as bold either, is it?
That's right, yeah. And actually I had a great time doing the graffiti. I think actually it was really quite a fun thing to do. And one of the things I did probably get a little bit carried away with some of them. But some of them actually ended up with multiple layers of graffiti over the top of each other. So you might see a wagon going past sometimes, it's got one graffiti logo on it, but you can see someone else has been graffitied over the top of the graffiti and try to replicate some of that as well. And some of them have just got one individual little symbol on them. Some have got a full bottom side. And that was all based on, I'd seen a train at Leicester last year, actually it was. It was a Castle Cement train that runs up from London to Ketton Cement Works. And it's one of those trains, I've always liked that train. But no word of a lie, every single wagon from front to back of that train on the bottom third of the tank barrel had graffiti on it, and it was the full bottom half of every single wagon. I didn't want to go that far with these. I didn't want to go to the point of having every single wagon with graffiti on it, but I did want to replicate some of that kind of feel of actually that has happened to the railway. But the other thing as well that I like about them is actually on the other side of anything that I've done the graffiti on, there is no graffiti on it. So it
Yes,
gives you that choice.
you've got
Actually,
that
you know
choice,
what?
of course.
I don't want to have the graffiti showing on all wagons, or I want to have a whole rake running around a layout like an exhibition layout, for example. You know, if it comes out of your storage yard that way around and it goes around to the public, it still ends up the same way around. You know, you can actually have that choice of having it with or without graffiti showing when you're running the wagons.
I actually like what you said before about doubling up on the graffiti, because let's be honest, people will graffiti and tag and graffiti and tag. If you look at even just walls down streets, for example, they can be so full of it.
Yeah.
And yet, very seldomly in model form do you actually see people double or triple up with their graffiti.
That's right.
That's a really good little idea and a great tip to actually make your models more realistic.
Yeah. And one of the other things I'd like to do as well is, now I've weathered some of these, I want to go back and add some more graffiti onto them over the top of the weathering, and then re-weather a little bit over the
That's
top.
a great idea.
Again, it's little things like, again, I remember the details of that train coming through the station where you could tell where, you know, the wagons have been recently graffitied and the ones that have been had it on for longer, because some of them had more staining over the graffiti, some of them had no staining on it, so it looked pretty fresh.
Yeah.
I want to replicate all those little details.
Actually, speaking of staining, one of the things that I get people asking me all the time, and of course I think a lot of us can subconsciously fall into, is when you've got, for example, the staining down the sides over here, and you don't mind if I just wreck your rolling stock,
No,
do
you
you?
just
No.
it's fine.
Well, when you've got the staining that runs down, without knowing it, some people can almost do it exactly the same. How do you consciously avoid not repeating yourself?
It's about, for me, it's about how much powder I'm picking up at a time. So some of the wagons, I literally loaded the brush and threw it at it, squidged it around, moved it about to the pattern I wanted. Other ones, I went really soft with the amount of powder that I had on the brush at a time. So just be putting a small amount on, then add a little bit more in. So it's about that kind of, you know, do you want a heavily weathered one? Do you want a lighter weathered finish? You know, it's like, for example, you rightly points out, between these two wagons that are just here, we've got one here where the streak is quite small and narrow, and actually the other end of the same wagon, the streak is much wider and broader.
Absolutely.
And that's very much about, I'm using the brushes to manipulate those powders, to pull them around to do the things I want them to do. And having that kind of view that actually, you know, you might think I'd do this with a big flat brush doing these powders, but I don't. I use a smaller brush. It allows me to move things around more to where I want them as well.
Definitely. Right, so we've now got this wonderful rake of PCAs that look fantastic, apart from this one here that has to be done.
I've got to finish those ones, yeah.
I know that, yeah.
I got to 19 out of 21. It wasn't a bad go.
Well, come on, Mike, I mean, up your game. Now, the question is, in part 2, we're going to be weathering this Class 66. So do we go for a heavy or do we go for a light finish? And what are we actually going to use to achieve the results?
Well, having looked around at a lot of pictures of this loco, it's always in fairly decent condition. So I'm going to go for a medium weathered finish, I think we're going to go for. The body sides will be fairly clean. There'll be a little bit of stain on the roof, but not too much. The underframe will be quite worn from all the brake dust and filth that comes up from the railway. I'm actually going to use a similar colour palette in terms of the basic weathering for the underframe to what I used when I started off on the PCAs. So I'm going to go back to my Trains and Tracks liquid pigment set from Lifecolor. I use their frame dirt, I'll use their rail dust, I'll use their brake dust colours on the underframe. And then we'll start bringing some other colours in to replicate things like the exhaust staining, any fuel spills on it, all those little details that can really bring this loco to life. And one of the great advantages of these paints, like I've talked about in the PCA weathering process, is that I don't need any thinners to lay these paints down. I just pull them out of the pot, put them in the airbrush, apply them to logos.
It does really help, doesn't it? Not having to find out what that ratio is.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things about them as well is actually, I think the finishes I'm getting with these are probably even more subtle and more realistic than what I was getting by using full colours let down. I still like some of that as well for certain types of weathering project, but they're working for me at the moment.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how we transform this Class 66, and hopefully you are as well. So make sure you stick around for part 2, which you can watch for free with a freemium account on keymodelworld.com. And if you want to get started in weathering using products similar to what Mike has used over here, you can also get those from the Key Model World shop, which of course is keymodelworld.com/shop.
That's right. And if you are into your 1960s era rolling stock as well, then maybe you want to sign up to Key Model World, go back to our previous series on weathering from 2023, and you can learn out how we did weathering of 9Fs and coal wagons and diesel locos,
tank
winches, all kinds of things we did. The
whole
series as well. So we've got a really good comprehensive series to get you started in weathering from 1960s era stock as well.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in part 2.